Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are jumping into one of Shakespeare's most epic sagas, Henry VI, Part 1. We're going to set the stage, introduce you to all the key players, and unpack the absolutely explosive political situation that's about to kick off the legendary Wars of the Roses.
So, where does our story start? Well, not with a birth or coronation, but with a funeral. England's great hero king, Henry V, the guy who conquered France, is dead. And, as you can see from this quote, this wasn't just any king. His deeds exceed all speech. His sudden death? Well, it doesn't just leave a hole. It creates this massive, dangerous power vacuum right at the top.
So who takes the throne? Well, that's the problem. It's his son, Henry VI, who is literally an infant. A child king is now in charge of a very vulnerable kingdom. And you can probably guess, this is the exact moment, the spark that's going to ignite decades of conflict, the Wars of the Roses. And Shakespeare starts the whole story right here, with a nation just teetering on the edge of total chaos. Okay, so with the great king gone and a baby on the throne, England is immediately staring down the barrel of two huge threats. We're talking about a kingdom under siege, with one crisis coming from the outside and another one, well, that one's brewing right at home. And this really lays it all out, doesn't it? England is fighting a war on two fronts. You've got the war abroad in France, where everything Henry V fought for is starting to crumble. Territories are being lost, key leaders captured. But honestly, the war at home might be even worse. You've got these nobles just squabbling, driven by jealousy. The whole court is basically tearing itself apart. All right, let's tackle that first threat, the French resistance. Because over in France, the English are in real trouble. Their whole conquest is starting to unravel as a new challenger steps up. So, on paper, the French leadership is, well, it's a bit of a mess. You've got Charles, the Dauphin, and a handful of dukes. They're losing, their morale is in the gutter, it really looks like it's over for them. But then, someone totally unexpected shows up. And boom, enter Joan of Arc. Or, as she's called in the play, Joan la Pucelle. She's just a young woman, but she claims she's having divine visions, that God himself has sent her to save France. And you know what? She is so convincing that she completely turns the tide of the war. She's a total game changer for the French. Okay, now let's turn our attention back to England, because the internal threat is, you could argue, even more dangerous. While France is rallying around this incredible new leader, the English court, it's an absolute mess. A court completely divided. And right in the middle of this swirling chaos is the young king himself, Henry VI. He's just a boy, not even crowned yet, and way too young to rule. So what happens? All the powerful men around him start jockeying for position, each one trying to grab control. Now officially, these two guys are supposed to be running the show. They're called the Protectors. They're the king's uncles, and their job is basically to hold the kingdom together until little Henry grows up. You've got Bedford handling the war in France, and Gloucester back home trying to keep everyone from, killing each other.
But yeah, it's not that simple. Their authority is constantly being challenged by these other powerful men. You've got the Bishop of Winchester, who absolutely hates Gloucester. And then there's the Duke of Somerset, who's always butting heads with this other guy, Richard Plantagenet. And Richard, well, he's got a secret that could blow the whole thing wide open.
So what's Richard's deal? This is absolutely crucial. He finds out from his dying uncle that, technically, his family has a better, more direct claim to the English throne than the current king. He basically learns that his family was cheated out of the crown, and he becomes absolutely determined to get it back. So, you can feel it, right? All this tension between the English nobles is just simmering under the surface, and it finally boils over in one of Shakespeare's most famous scenes. This is it. This is where the War of the Roses really begins. I mean, just think about this for a second. The fight between Richard Plantagenet and the Duke of Somerset has gotten so nasty, so toxic, that nobody else dares to speak up. Everyone is terrified of picking a side and facing the consequences. So what do? Well, Richard comes up with a pretty clever solution. He basically says, look, since you're all too scared to talk, show us where you stand. He tells them to use dumb significance, or silent symbols, to make their loyalties known without saying a single word. And here it is, the iconic scene in the Temple Garden. Richard walks over, plucks a white rose, and says, anyone who's with me, pick one of these. In response, the Duke of Somerset grabs a red rose. And just like that, with this one simple symbolic act,
the two sides are formed. The white rose for the House of York and the red rose for the House of Lancaster.
And then, in a heartbreaking moment, the young king tries to make peace. But he has no idea what these roses now mean. He's asked to choose, and he just picks a red one. He thinks he's just picking a flower, but what he's actually doing is siding with Somerset. He alienates Richard Plantagenet and turns this feud into a full-blown royal conflict. And that's it. The battle lines are now officially drawn. You've got the House of Lancaster, the Red Rose, with King Henry and Somerset, and on the other side, the House of York, the White Rose, led by Richard Plantagenet and his allies. There's no turning back now.
So let's just recap the situation, because it's a perfect storm. The stage is set. We have all the characters in place. You've got a kingdom that's incredibly fragile, led by a little boy. You've got a powerful enemy getting stronger in France. And at home, you have a nobility that has literally just split itself into two warring factions. Conflict isn't just possible, it's inevitable.
So, we've met all the major players, and we understand the political powder keg they're all sitting on. In our next explainer, we're going to see what happens when that fuse is finally lit. We'll dive right into the plot and all the dramatic action of the play. And all of this leaves us with the one central burning question that drives this entire play. With enemies at the gate and your own house dividing against itself, how on earth can a boy king possibly hope to prevent a civil war? It's a question that's about to plunge England into one of the bloodiest chapters in its history.
So, you've heard of the Wars of the Roses, right? Well, in this explainer, we're diving into Shakespeare's Henry VI Part 1, the explosive, often overlooked origin story for one of the most brutal civil wars in history. This is the prequel, the story of how it all began. The whole play kicks off at a moment of absolute national crisis. We're at the funeral of a legend, King Henry V. He's the hero who conquered France, but now he's gone, leaving behind just a baby as his heir, and a kingdom that's suddenly feeling very, very vulnerable. And that immediately raises the huge question that hangs over this entire story. How on earth did a nation at the very peak of its power manage to lose all of its hard-won territory in France, and even worse, turn on itself in a bloody civil war? Well, the answer is pretty simple and pretty grim. England is about to start fighting a war on two fronts. You've got the official war, the one happening overseas against the French, and then you have the unofficial one, the war of ambition and jealousy brewing right there at home in the very heart of the English court. As Henry V's brothers, the Dukes of Bedford and Gloucester, are literally still mourning him at his funeral, that power vacuum he left behind starts to crack open. And then, one after another, messengers start arriving from France, and each one brings worse news than the last. And just like that, everything starts to unravel. The French, led by their prince, the Dauphin Charles, are actually fighting back. Key English-held towns are falling. And the final nail in the coffin? Their military superstar, the fearsome Lord Talbot, has been taken prisoner. All of a sudden, England is shockingly on the defensive. Okay, so while the English are reeling from all this bad news, a new, almost mythical figure emerges in France to lead the resistance, a young woman who claims she's been sent by God. This is Joan la Pucelle, who you probably know as Joan of Arc. Now, to test her wild claims, the Dauphin challenges her to a duel, and she beats him. Right there, in that one moment, this peasant girl proves her divine mission, and a totally stunned Dauphin hands her command of the entire French army. And this, as you can imagine, creates a stark divide. For the French, Joan is a miracle, a saint sent from heaven to save them. But for the English, oh no, she's the exact opposite, a demonic witch using black magic and sorcery to cheat them out of their rightful victories. Now, while Joan is turning the tide of the war in France, let's pivot back to England, because a seemingly small argument is about to accidentally create the symbols for a century of bloodshed. The war at home is about to get a name. It all goes down in London's Temple Garden. Two powerful nobles, Richard Plantagenet and the Duke of Somerset, are locked in this bitter personal dispute. When words fail, they tell the other nobles around them to pick a side, not by speaking, but by picking a flower. Richard's followers pluck white roses from a bush, Somerset's pick red ones. Richard himself calls the roses dumb significance, silent symbols. In a court that's so paralyzed by factions that nobody dares speak their true allegiance out loud, these flowers are going to do all the talking. It's the iconic moment that gives the coming war its name. And then, the young, totally naive King Henry makes a fatal mistake. He's trying to be a peacemaker, but he has no idea what the real stakes are. He plucks a red rose. He thinks it's just a meaningless gesture, but what he's actually done is publicly side with Somerset, and in doing so, he has deeply offended Richard Plantagenet. The battle lines are now drawn. And this is the moment where those two wars, the feud in England and the actual fighting in France, smash right into each other, with absolutely devastating results. The petty squabbles of politicians are about to get England's best soldier killed. Lord Talbot, the great English hero, is surrounded by the French army. He desperately sends for backup. But here's the problem. The infantry is controlled by Richard of York, and the cavalry is commanded by Somerset. Each man hesitates, refusing to send his troops to help the other guy's faction. They both point fingers, they both dither, and in the end, nobody sends help. The result is an absolute catastrophe. The English army is wiped out. Lord Talbot, the living symbol of English chivalry and military might, is killed on the battlefield right alongside his son. His death isn't just a military loss, it's the death of an entire ideal, brought down by political backstabbing happening miles away. In the grim aftermath of this massive defeat, the fighting in France starts to wind down. But the peace that follows is maybe even more dangerous than the war was, because it's built on personal ambition and deceit, not any kind of genuine unity. First off, that supernatural force that guided the French seems to just vanish. Joan's visions abandon her. She gets captured by the English, accused of being a witch, and is tragically burned at the stake. With the war fizzling out, a new power player emerges, the Earl of Suffolk. He captures this beautiful but basically penniless French princess, Margaret of Anjou. But instead of ransoming her, he cooks up a much bigger plan. He's going to arrange for her to marry the weak-willed King Henry. And here's where we see his true motive. In a classic Shakespearean aside, he turns to the audience and spells out his master plan. This marriage isn't about peace. It's not for the good of England. By controlling the new queen, he figures he can control the king, and, through them, the entire country. But not everyone is fooled by this. The king's wise protector, the Duke of Gloucester, sees this marriage for the political disaster it is. He can sense that this whole arrangement, born out of Suffolk's selfish ambition, is a really, really dark omen for England's future. And that's where Shakespeare leaves us. England's greatest hero is dead, betrayed by his own countrymen. The court is hopelessly split into factions, symbolized by the red and the white rose, and a powerful new queen is on her way, a pawn in a nobleman's ambitious power game. The war against France might be over, but the War of the Roses is just about to begin. All right, let's dive right in. What if I told you that one of Shakespeare's most famous plays might not have been written by him? At least, not all of it. Today, we're cracking open the case file on Henry VI, Part 1. This is a play so controversial, so debated, it's been puzzling critics for literal centuries, and we're going to figure out exactly why. So, from the very beginning, this play has had a serious reputation problem. I mean, look at this quote. It's often just brushed aside as being clunky, way too violent, and maybe not even authentically, Shakespearean. And believe me, that one opinion has pretty much shaped how this play's been treated for generations. It's got this cloud hanging over it. Okay, so the big question is that reputation really fair? Is this play just a dud, an early career misstep? Or is there something much more complex and fascinating going on here? We're about to dig into the 3 biggest controversies swirling around this play, and we're going to start with the most fundamental question of all. Right, investigation number 1, the mystery of who actually wrote it. And this is the big one. We're talking authorship. Long before people started questioning who wrote other plays, critics were looking at Henry VI, Part 1, and kind of scratching their heads, asking, did Shakespeare really write this whole thing by himself, or did he have some help? Okay, so get a load of this number. According to a super detailed analysis by the scholar Gary Taylor, Shakespeare might have written as little as 18.7% of this play. Let that sink in. Less than a fifth. I mean, that's wild. This theory suggests the play is basically a patchwork quilt of different writers, with Shakespeare coming in almost like an editor, not the sole creative genius. And look, this isn't some newfangled debate. This goes way, way back. You had critics like Edmund Malone, who were among the first to say, hey, the style here, it just doesn't feel like Shakespeare. But for centuries, you've had other scholars pushing back, defending his sole authorship. It's this huge critical tug-of-war. And honestly, it really challenges our whole idea of the lone genius artist. You know, the guy scribbling away all by himself in a dusty room. So if Shakespeare wasn't alone in that room, who were his collaborators? The list of potential co-authors, the suspects, if you will, reads like a who's who of the Elizabethan stage. We're talking about heavy hitters like Thomas Nosh, Thomas Kidd, and, get this, even Shakespeare's greatest rival, the one and only Christopher Marlowe. And this isn't just old news. The debate is so alive that the 2016 New Oxford Shakespeare edition now officially lists Marlowe as a co-author. How crazy is that? All right, investigation number 2. Let's talk about whether this play is just crude or if it was actually cutting edge for its day. For centuries, critics have kind of looked down on it, calling it unsophisticated, mainly because of all the fighting, all the battles, right there on stage. But here's the question. Was that just a sign of bad writing, or was it exactly what audiences in the 1590s wanted to see? Say, for a lot of critics who came after Shakespeare, good drama had to follow certain rules. We call them neoclassical precepts now. And a huge one, like rule number 1, was that violence is messy. It belongs off stage. You can have a messenger run on and tell everyone about a horrible battle, but you do not show it. Well, Henry VI Part 1 completely ignores this. It's packed with sword fights, battles, and people dying right there in front of everybody. It just shatters that rule. And this wasn't just some idea that came along later. Even Shakespeare's own contemporary, the super famous playwright Ben Jonson, was a bit of a snob about this. He basically said that all those onstage battles, that's for the vulgar, for the common folks who like flashy visuals more than beautiful language. He thought real art should be for the ears, not the eyes. So by that standard, yeah, Henry VI was definitely considered lowbrow entertainment. But here's the other side of the coin, and this comes directly from the play's own time. The writer Thomas Nash, and hey, remember him, he's one of our potential co-authors, he absolutely loved this stuff. He praised plays just like this one for bringing history to life, for reviving these valiant acts and getting the audience fired up with patriotism. For Nash, the action on stage wasn't crude at all. No way. It was exciting, it was powerful, and it was exactly what people needed to experience. So this whole debate just goes to show you something really important. What one era calls bad art, another might see as totally powerful and effective. I mean, the very thing that made later critics roll their eyes at this play, all that raw, in-your-face action, that's precisely what made it a smash hit in 1592. It's just a perfect reminder that our ideas about what makes art good are constantly changing. Okay, on to our final investigation. Let's look past all the arguments about who wrote it and whether the fights are too cheesy. Let's try to uncover what this play is actually about. Because underneath all that noise, pretty much everyone agrees that it's digging into some seriously powerful ideas. A huge one, maybe the central theme, is this idea of the death of chivalry. The play shows us a world that's changing, right? The old code of honor of knights fighting for glory and country, that's dying out. The play's great hero, Lord Talbot, he's the embodiment of that old world. But he's being replaced by petty politicians and selfish schemers. The rules of the game are changing. And you can really feel it in this quote from Talbot himself. He's furious, condemning another knight for being a total coward. He's saying that if you don't have true honor, you're basically faking it. You're profaning the sacred name of knight. For Talbot, this isn't just a job or a title. It's a sacred duty. He's the last of a kind. And that's the tragedy, right? His incredible code of honor makes him a hero, but it also makes him totally obsolete in this new, cynical world. Now, you absolutely cannot talk about this play without getting to its most controversial figure by far, Joan of Arc. Seriously, the depiction of her in this play is, well, it's all over the place. She is portrayed as this fascinating, totally contradictory mix of a saint, a witch, a warrior, and, well, even a sensual tart. Depending on which character is speaking, she's either a heaven-sent savior or a literal demon from hell. And the contrast couldn't be more stark. I mean, look at this. For the French, she's France's saint, this holy figure sent from God to rescue their nation. But for the English? Oh, to them she's a damned sorceress, a witch, a foul fiend. The play never lands on one single truth. Instead, it just presents her as this radically unsettling and contradictory figure. This portrayal was so shocking, especially to later audiences, that it brings us right back to our first investigation, the authorship question. 18th century critics, in particular, were so appalled by how harshly Joan was depicted that they used it as proof that Shakespeare couldn't have written those parts. Their argument was basically that the great, humane Shakespeare would never be so vicious. So to them, it was more evidence that someone else wrote those scenes, almost as a way to, clear Shakespeare's good name. So, after digging through all that evidence, where do we actually land with Henry VI Part 1? What's the final verdict on this problem play? Let's recap the core issues we've looked at. First, its authorship is a genuine mystery, right? There's really strong evidence pointing to collaboration. Second, all that onstage violence was a huge hit back in the day, but got it labeled as crude later on. And finally, its themes, especially that really challenging depiction of Joan of Arc, are still complex and controversial today. And that brings us to the final takeaway. Maybe all of the play's so-called problems, the messy authorship, the raw violence, the controversial characters, maybe they aren't problems at all. Maybe that's the whole point. Perhaps its messiness, its collaborative spirit, and its raw energy are exactly what make it such an incredibly fascinating window into the early English stage. You could say that from a critical point of view, its greatest weaknesses are actually its greatest strengths. And all of this leaves us with one last big question to think about. A play like Henry VI Part 1 really messes with our tidy ideas of what a masterpiece is supposed to look like. It forces us to ask, how should we value art that is messy, that is collaborative, and that is controversial? What can we learn from the art that doesn't fit neatly into a box? It's definitely something to think about.